from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're listening to the CISO Talk podcast. No sales, no bullshit, just straight talk. Straight talk. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the CISO Talk podcast. I'm your host, James Azar. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. I've got a very, very exciting show. I've got the mother of all knowledge brains here joining me today, and this is going to be an extremely fun conversation. But before we do that, folks, two things I'd like to ask of you. If it's your first time tuning into the show, please subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. That helps push us up in the rankings. We are now number 37 in the US in technology, so I'm grateful for your support. Today's episode is also supported by our friends over at Know4 and Wistic. You can check them out as well. Links are below in the description of the episode. And now, without further ado, joining me, a man, a legend, I think a 30-year veteran in cyber, the CISO over at Motorola Mobility, Mr. Richard Rushing. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this.
Excellent. So I'm so excited to have you. I know that you and I get on a tangent, we start talking, which is great. Now we're only recording, which is wonderful because now we can talk all we want and everyone gets to enjoy it. And it's no longer just us talking. Richard, if you don't mind, just for people who don't know who Richard is, and if you haven't seen him speak at an event or read any of his articles on LinkedIn or other major publications, would you mind just sharing a little bit about your background, how you got started in cyber and what you do today?
Sure. I could say I'm one of the few people, even at my age, I've always dealt with technology and cybersecurity for that. To date myself, not that the gray beard doesn't date myself already, when I conducted my first pen test for a bank located in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was going to school at the time. It was with dial-up modems. There was no internet. There was no connectivity. Their whole purpose was, we know that you know how to configure dial-up better than anybody else. We would like to know if you can break into our current. We just redid our modem banks, and we put security in place. But we're still not concerned with it that it's 100% accurate at that point in time. So we would like you to do it. And that was the first time I had a paid engagement, literally 19 years old, that's there doing this. And yeah, it was basically dial up, try to get in, password guessing, etc. on that, all sorts of different things that were there. Was successful. Back to the same thing of, hey, there was some, how would you say it, firmware patching that was required at those days that, hey, this is a known exploit and you probably should do something with it. But at the level, that was where I started it. And I even started long before that. My dad was worked for, at the time, GE, Honeywell, Bull, as mainframe operator, field service person on that side of it that's there. And that became that was from an early age. I had a PC way back in 1977. It was a TRS-80. I taught myself programming, multiple languages. I just fell in love with the idea. I grew up watching sci-fi and technology. And for me, it was like, it was the fantasy or movie became a reality. I was actually can communicate. I can send things. I could see stuff you could see. And you were like, this is so cool and wild. It's completely different than everything that's there. Plus I can create stuff. And that just performed that direction and became a passion as I went through. And then as I continued to kind of work into this, I started working for organizations in IT and portions of security at the time that's going through there. And work for large organizations on that side, including the likes of GE Capital, Siemens North America, and those kind of things that were all parts of that. And it always fascinated me as you got into it and wanted to do the areas. You kind of moved quickly, but not as quickly as today's environments is there. But it was this evolution because people just got to desktops. They were just embracing local area networks. So wide area networks were the whopping 56K modem ISDN connections between branches and sites. All these different things that were all parts of that says, hey, this technology is there. And it continued to grow. And I did from different things, from administration to architecture, all the different sides of it. And I finally got, how would you want to say, upset at a organization I was working with because they didn't believe this internet thing, as they called it, was going to take off anywhere. And I said, you're crazy. This is like the best thing since sliced bread. Or it's like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It fits perfectly with what I want to do. So I ventured out and went into this world of startups of that. And at the time, startups weren't even the name. It was like, hey, we're just doing a company that's going to focus on security on that side of it. So that was a portion of the side. I went out and with three other people formed Secure IT, which for the longest time was a reseller of firewalls and security services, one of the largest training providers for security services around that. I produced a lot of the courseware for it. So I love the idea of education and people and understanding that. I created or helped create part of the what hackers know that you don't. And that was a huge popular area that people were just trying to look at. Went around and spoke on these subjects at conferences or on seminars and things around that. And I got into that area, and then we got acquired by VeriSign. Then I left VeriSign, worked on some advisory services, and then came back into doing wireless security. And that's how I came to breathe at Motorola, and that was about 15 years ago. So I have done these on occasions, and to the side of it, I'm one of the few people that's kind of played on both sides of the fence of, hey, here's where startup world is, and here's technology. At the same time, here's big monolithic kind of organizations, and yes, they don't move as fast, but they have a lot of things that are super useful that a lot of the smaller organizations do. When you start getting into, I have technology, I have people, and I have processes. The processes they have are pretty much lined up and directed and modified and changed and worked on and refined time and time again. And I think that's one of the things that I usually typically bring out as far as that is that, hey, you've got multiple levers, not a lot. It's not like I've got a digital studio dashboard with hundreds of levers. I got like 3 buttons that I get to play with on a regular basis. And those are the keys. And understanding when and not, I think, becomes part of the success of there. So I've been CISO now almost over 14 years at Motorola. And people ask, it's like, how are you there for so long? Well, we've gone through a lot of different changes. So that's one reason why that is. But the second thing is I have great team that's been with me pretty much the full 14 years. I work with great people. And so it's one of those things that goes back to it is it's a comfortable organization and trying to move and do things that's there. I still feel needed. And I still feel that I'm making an impact. So I'm happy in those areas that are there. Plus, I get to play with all the cool tech from PCs to phones on a regular basis, which is where how do you want to say it? The darker side of some of the stuff of like when I was growing up, you were cell phone hacking, set-top box hacking were the keys to the kingdom. And then when I moved over to Motorola Mobility, they're like, you're in charge of set-top box and cell phones. And I was like, this is karma all coming together now to say, hey, guess what? You knew all about this now. Guess what? You got to fix all these problems. There's a difference on both of those sides on that side of it. But I think that's one of the things of the world has a funny way of a sense of humor sometimes of when things come around on a second time to go, wow, here, you may have helped create these problems. Now you have to go fix some of these at the same time. So I think those are some of the interesting areas that get drawn into on that side.
Richard, thank you for sharing. Your background is so extensive. It's so awesome to hear you talk about the very, very beginnings of what was computing, right? to what is now such a sophisticated computing place. I mean, I just read something that apparently Intel's been able to add ransomware detection capabilities at the silicon level of a chip.
Yeah, and it gets down to the same thing of how, and people are always around portions of the technology, and we're still at the idea that tech, no matter where it's at today, you're still just scratching the surface. That's there. There is always so much more you can do with the technology that's in play. And I think that's why you see like generations of startups continuing to come into this into these environments and things around that, because the tech is still a greenfield opportunity to go do something. And it's not because of, hey, this is a better mousetrap or this is something. No, it's usually completely different ways to look at things just because somebody has a different thought process or some of the other sides of that. For like the CPU side, people have looked at, hey, CPU consumption and things around that nature, especially around that. You can look at processes, you can look at things that are supposed to happen, things that are not supposed to happen. You go back to some of the very interesting processing. You had some of the meltdown issues with Intel and some of the other ones where their branch prediction side of it was, hey, the hardware guys knew one thing, the software guys knew another. Somehow they never went drinking together at some point to go, hey, we predict out things about 12 steps ahead of you, and we're like at 90% accuracy. And they're like, what? Say what? But those are things that you scratch the surface. And when you get some of these people and ideas coming together, it comes into a whole nother way that's there. And yeah, as you're getting and moving down into these environments, Motorola always had a saying is like, get close to the radio, get close to where the technology actually is, because that's where the tech is the strongest and the capabilities are the strongest. And that's true today on the PCs and everything else. When I get into these environments, it's like, hey, I can do a lot in the hardware, because at the end of the day, the hardware is the hardware, but it's software running on top of that is actually doing things. And you have a lot of capability and a lot of extra cycles to do things. And I think that's something that's always overlooked, is if you look at the computing power that a simple laptop has today, it's truly amazing on that side of it that's there, of what it is versus just a few years ago, just a few generations ago on the processor side, and the capabilities are there. So I think that's a great place to grab stuff in and gravitate to.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership, Richard. In all of your years, you one of the things you highlighted before was, for 14 years, you've been in the same role, which most CISOs can't say they've been in the same role for 14, 15 years. CISOs are kind of like, Fords, right? Like, you're found on road dead, you're the first breakdown, you're left there. There's a bunch of different ways we can compare CISOs and Fords. And for those who love Fords, I apologize. I too own one, but still, nonetheless, it's still a good joke. Talk about how do you manage to keep people with you for so long in a job where we hear a lot about burnout, substance abuse, just zero forgiveness for mistakes, almost a zero tolerance policy for when something bad happens, that we clean house, almost kind of like a 016 Detroit Lions season, where you just end up firing the whole team because it's just that mentality. So what can you share with us?
Yeah. Well, I think your car analogy is good, but I think you choose the wrong brand. I think the modern day CISO is more of a Dodge or Ram side of it. Is like, where can I move? Where can I go? Semi trucks coming, move, kind of scenarios and some of that. But I think leadership is there, and I think it kind of boils down to there's a lot of discussions going on today about trust. And I think that is a big key. If you've established a trust relationship with executives, with leaders, you're not in an isolated box. And I think that's one of the other key things that a lot of people like, hey, well, I'm just in this box. And we always used to joke that, hey, the IT folks are in the basement and in a room. We don't let some of the security folks out because they don't work well with others, and whatever the characteristics are, and a lot of the stuff that we kind of joke about on that side of it. I think there is some instances to that, is that, hey, if I isolate myself over here because, hey, they don't understand it, they don't want to do anything, you're really kind of putting yourself off, because you really need to be in the middle of business. And you need to work with your key work partners, legal department. And I'm not all one from in some of those, because they have their rigid ways of working. You have your other ways, and they kind of always collide. But there's reasons why those collisions occur, and you need to respect that and understand that. But I think that isolation will destroy organizations really quickly, because there's no way to build trust. You're kind of off in the center, and you're kind of doing something that no one knows about, no one sees the good or the bad. And I think that's one of the key things, that you really have to be integrated with the business. You really have to be integrated with your leadership and executive leadership and senior leadership and the movers and shakers inside the organization that are there. I always had one of the best things. I go, you can tell who your friends are and who your friends aren't in an organization. Just go invite people to lunch. Because if I'm not your friend, I will never go to lunch with you, because I'm going to be stuck with you at a table for an hour or 90 minutes. And if I don't like being with you, I'm not going to be there. So at that point in time, you can know who, hey, yeah, let's go and chat. Those are things that you need to build, that relationship, that trust, that human factor. We can say trust is a mathematical function or anything else, but in all actuality, a lot of times it's a gut feeling with people. A person's going to trust somebody because they have a gut feeling about it. Right or wrong, it is that area that's there, and you got to play into that, lean into that function to say, okay, yeah, I got to develop that. How's good ways to develop that? And again, that's part of these human interactions, which now in the COVID world is really difficult. But those are things that definitely are part of that. And I think it's one of the things you've got to take care of your organization, your people, how they work, how they respond. It's almost like a small startup company. I always kind of run my groups of small startups and have meetings and different things around that. And yeah, get your elevator pitch down. Why? Because you never know who's going to be in an elevator and they're going to say, hey, yeah, security, what do you do? You need to have that 30-second, 60-second kind of thing to say, everybody knows it, everybody does, kind of like the mission statement or the other stuff. But get some of that ingrained into your team, but also take credit for your wins and your losses and things that you stopped. A lot of people just say, hey, I put up all this stuff and it's doing good, but you get kind of called on the carpet when something bad actually happens. And if you haven't said, yeah, we blocked like 3.5 million things in the last quarter that could have came into the organization. This one slipped by, came into the organization. But if they don't know that you blocked 3.5 million, guess what? You're kind of out of luck. So you really have to look and say that, yeah, here's what we're doing. Here's our accountability on that side of it. But at the same time, yeah, I made a mistake. Be the first person to raise your hand and go, sorry, this happened. We'll do it better next time. Thank you. And here is all the information and continue around it. Root cause analysis. Boom. Here you go. Because if you're not doing that, at the end of the day, you're kind of not. It's kind of your car analogy. You're not running on all your cylinders. You're running on half of them that are actually there. Of like, hey, we're just responding to the bad things that actually happen. No, you should respond to good things that have happened. You should be able to respond to things that you've stopped and let people in the organization know that. And you'll discover a world of kind of difference that will occur as kind of that shift in security culture, that shift of where things are. So you're the people that I don't want to talk to you're the person that I want to talk to. And I think that's the key area that you can see definitely a change on that side as well.
That's a great example of leadership in terms of empowering your team and really kind of running them like a small startup. It's a lot of times in security, we tend to think in kind of a discipline area, like our teams are always broken into disciplines, rather than maybe a combination of it's such a cool way of doing it and such a cool way of running it. Let me ask you this though, as someone who's been leading the same team and the same organization for 14, 15 years, what are some of your best practices in terms of working with the rest of the business units and really kind of spreading security across the organization?
I think it's a personal relationship. I think human meeting and everything else. I always volunteer myself or my team or members of my team to go sit in on people's staff meetings and other ways to spread the security, whatever you wish to call it, doctrine, capabilities, what we do kind of thing, and education around that to basically come into this where it's there. Because I'm with a firm belief in, there are some people that do things that are just malicious, but most of the security stuff is an accident. People don't necessarily go down and like, I don't care about installing this patch on that side of it because I just don't care. And I'm not going to do it. No one does that. They're just like, I'm busy. I don't have time. I didn't prioritize it high enough. Well, why didn't they prioritize it high enough? That's kind of my job. Because unfortunately, I didn't tell you that it was critical. It says critical, but you didn't do anything. Or I don't have an automated way to do it. Or I'm not going to your meetings of your change board and everything else going, hey, we have to roll these patches out. We have to patch. Those kind of scenarios kind of always fall back. I take responsibility that if people are doing wrong things, I haven't talked to them, I haven't reached out to them, or there's something there. And I don't have there's a scale issue with that. I can't talk to 54,000 people annually on that side of it. But at the same time, I need to figure out ways to get the large swaths of people and everything else and it's not just a one-time thing because security keeps changing. And it's part of the same thing. It's like we've got 70 terabytes of data flying out the door at some locations. You've got other organizations that have their SDLC compromised and arbitrary code malicious code is injected into the regular build process. So you literally have a lot of different things that are there that everybody's interested in. Everybody wants to talk about, but you need to come up with the ways to talk about it and do that. And some of it's just Q&A, some of it's just that, but it's also empowering your team. Everybody on the team should have a great understanding of every kind of major incident that goes on because they may get a question asked, or even in some cases, they're the subject matter expert. This is the CIDC pipeline person that's there. Guess what? He's going to be the front and center of all this. Well, if he's the front and center, don't let me go talk to the people. Let this guy talk to the people. And it's also the same level as like, yes, I can talk to executives. Great. It starts at the top. But at the same time, where is it going to make the biggest impact? Well, at the operator level or the people or the admin level that people are doing the business. So guess what? It could be a divide and conquer. It can be one of the other things. And at the divide and conquer level, I will want my team member to go talk to the executives simply due to the fact that, hey, they need experience in talking with executives. But also the executives need to know that, hey, this guy is really good at the CIDC pipeline and understand what that is, and I understand it. So when there's an issue or a question, instead of me being the bottleneck or me being that funnel that says everything comes to me because it makes me feel good inside, it makes me feel needed and everything else. I feel way already too needed in most of the time. But they know the direct connection. They know where the dot connects to. So let me contact the person. Let me contact that subject matter expert and get the answer to my question instead of me getting the email, forwarding it to the SME answering it, responds back to me. I cut and copy and paste and send it back to them. That's a lot of extra time that's just spent. And instead of going, hey, let me talk to the subject matter expert, great. Here's the answer that I actually need. So when you empower your users, empower them all the way up the stack. Don't cap them and say, okay, here's the levels that you're actually dealing with on that. Empower them all the way, because at that subject matter expert, you're actually saving yourself the headache of now fielding 30 different questions all coming in that you're not going to be able to answer. You're going to pass it off. So why am I playing middleman in part of that process? And I think that's one of the key things is understanding if you're playing middleman role, move it and shift it. But it's one of those things that's hard to shift if you don't start it. It's kind of the old, and I'm sure a lot of listeners and everything else, it's the help desk person or the tech support person that you knew you had that could always give you your answer. And he got moved up out of tech support. But guess what? He still gets tons of emails every day from people that are asking for tech support simply due to the fact that he was good at it and he provided the answers that are trying to need. So if you can trigger that at that level, you're going to continue doing a lot of good will in the organization and saving yourself a lot of extra time of just playing middleman and shuffling emails back and forth.
Yeah, I love that approach of just giving people the opportunity to do the work and not being a bottleneck. That's so critical, I think, for so many CISOs to sometimes realize, let go, let things kind of work, understand that you've got to focus on bigger and better things. I think a lot of times we get lost on the small details. We forget the big picture of the role.
Yeah, you are going to be the biggest bottleneck in the CISO organization is the CISO, just because they're inundated with requests and things on a regular basis, whether it's from outside, inside, everything else. Again, I think I generate more mail than our marketing groups in a lot of cases and some stuff that's there. And I should on that. They're marketing to the rest of the world. I'm marketing to the whole company and organization on a regular basis.
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about cyber. So you talk a lot about how you're not a bottleneck. So where do you spend most of your time today?
In different areas. I think it's one of the things, and it's you have your passions, and I have a lot of different passions. And I think you need to focus with what your passion is, but at the same time, make your passion something that makes you happy. Because if you're doing things that are not making you happy, and things around that nature, you're gonna be in not a really good mental state or anything else. You need to do things that, hey, I'm really passionate about this and I'm really in this focus. And I think that's one of the key areas. I spent a lot of time in the world of malware, nation state, APT actors, cyber criminal organizations, dark web, the really of criminal areas, as well as kind of holistically stepping back and looking at like, oh, okay, the the whole economy of a cyber criminal organization and things around a lot of that nature. And I think it's one of the things too that in some cases you need to deep dive, and in other cases you may not want to deep dive. It's like, oh, do I need to worry about like attribution and some of those? Yes, in some of the cases I do, and in other cases, who did this doesn't really matter on that, because it's not something that's a target. It's like crime of opportunity that's there. It's the brick through the plain glass window that shattered in the front, and everybody ran in and grabbed stuff. Now the question is, was it planned? Was it there? It's like bad things happen, and we've got controls in place, and we're safe at that level. And yes, you can ask those other questions, but at the same time, at the end of the day, you're trying to recover, see what damages are, what securities and prices. But I think it's one of the things that goes into that those are interesting areas for me. New technology and how it's being implemented. Because I think, like you pointed out with Intel of looking at ransomware on the chip, I think those are new ways, connectivity, how things are talking to one another, how things are going to interconnect together, how data is going to be shared, and what data is going to be shared. All of those things are relatively super interesting to me on those sides of it that's there. I spend a lot of time on things like data fidelity. I'm like, is this enough to answer my questions? Because I want to have a question answered. I don't want to ask the game of 30 questions to get my answer. I want to ask a question to get my answer. So do I, because nothing sucks worse than when you get to question 29 and it ruins it. In other words, it's like, we can't answer that question. What do you mean you can't? Well, you can't. Well, now I don't know the answer to the whole thing. So it's kind of a waste of time. So you want to make sure that when something does happen, you have the fidelity, whether it's in your logs, whether it's in your dashboards, whether it's wherever it is, that you can answer the questions instead of doing next question, next question, next question, next question. Because I don't think security should be read like a novel that says, okay, you need to get to page 120 to figure out what actually happened. Because that's good, but guess how long it's going to take you to read 120 pages on that side of it. And that's going to be kind of the killer, because the time sink is the goal. Because people are like, well, it's the response time and everything else. I'm like, it's not, it's the people time. And I will say the one thing that if you're going to manage anything in the organization for your group, manage time. Because that's your limited resource. There is no, hey, guess what? We got to do ER. We got to do IR right now, where we've got a problem, incident response, grab 5 or 6 people. They spend 2 days figuring things out. They come back. Okay, great. We got 2 days. Well, those 5 people times 2 days times how many hours they worked, you're never going to get those hours back in a year. It's not like I can say, go work the weekend and make up for that. So whatever projects they were working on, whatever things they were working on, it's gone. It's now 2 days delayed. No matter how good the person is, you just cut out 16 hours out of their week that's there. Now they're going to have to respond to that. And I think that's a key thing to say, hey, keep track of the timing that's a portion of that, so that you can understand of like, hey, all these ancillary ad hoc kind of things that are going to happen, those are time sucks that I'm never going to get that precious quantity back into that. So I'm also about things that are saving people time and how things are parts of that. And that's always one of the key areas that I'm there of like, hey, can I cut hours out of your day or cut those tasks that you don't want to do, those mundane tasks, and move those into the area that's focused on that.
So, Richard, you bring up some really good points about where you spend your time and kind of the new technology aspect and learning, which I think is a really good lesson for a lot of CISOs. I start my day by reading for an hour, right? And I end my day by reading for an hour. And the idea is, if you invest 2 hours a day in yourself, and you can do it for 20 minutes. You can do it you don't have to do what I do, right? Yeah. I work from home. My commute is 5 seconds. going up and down the stairs. There's no traffic jams.
Yeah. Better than mine. My cats are on my thing, so I got to shoo them away most of the time on the stairs. So,
and so I have an easy commute, and I think that it's important a lot of times for us to continue to study different technology and different things that come along, because there's, you can know security, but security is one of those roles where it's endless education.
No, I totally agree, and I think there's interesting technologies that are out there just doing this stuff. You originally had the kind of, and it's a progression of stuff, and it's also what's right for something may not be right for something else. So you can take a look at kind of the great data lake. Just throw every data that's there, and you can go back into the SIM argument that that's where it is. Hey, look, everything is in here. And it's like, great, it's the garbage dump. So is everything that's actually in there. Do you need it? Is it there? Is it valuable to you? How long do you keep it? All those different things are portions of that. But it's back to the other side of it, of like, people looked at it and said, yeah, having all this stuff is not. That's when they came up with like Graph and some of the other ones, where we take a point and we get all the data on the point, and then we draw more points to the other side of it. So now I can correlate pieces of this technology together, and you're just seeing the cusps of how those are affecting, of like, hey, I change away from, hey, indexing, searching, finding, to real-time points to come back in and look at the data that's there, and a new categorization of ways you classify data and the information that's there and the accessible of that's there. And so you're getting into lots of different areas. And I totally agree with you. You need to have a passion, and you need to kind of fulfill that passion and learning things that are new. Maybe it's not reading, maybe it's doing videos, watching videos, listening to podcasts, any number of things. There's so much of it. People ask me, it's like, there, I can go back and pull out like sorted materials of, like, I have a whole rainbow book collection of stuff, which is always good, because I can go back and go, look, page 36, authorization and access control. It's exactly right. It hasn't changed much. It's not the same. And again, this is stuff published in mainframe days and things around that nature. It hasn't changed. It's the same thing. So, but the technology around it has changed. So you really have to start pulling in. I used to love taking the commute into the office, because I'd take the train in, and it's about 45 minutes. And that was my read time. That was my Twitter posting time, reading, looking, and pulling in the same thing. I think one of the key things too, from a perspective on that, is sharing content with that. I'm a big proponent of like blasting out content to people that says, hey, this is important, great article that's written around this. Take a look at this. And whether it's on a public forum or internal emails or posting on forums, those are things that you should want to actually do, not from an area, but it helps you with interesting conversations. Hey, are you looking at this? And you saw from the software attack and some of the other components of that that came out, it was like, hey, these other systems that set on top of the controlled source code functionalities and everything else, maybe they were an impact area, and that was how that area was impacted with that. But those are things that you're like, maybe I need to go learn more about source code repositories, because that's now on my radar of things to go do. So you should let things drive portions of that knowledge and education, but you should share what you learn on that side of it, of that. And we do it with our teams. Hey, used to be when you went to a conference that was physical, people would do a report, says, hey, here's like 5 or 6 vendors that I came across that seem interesting. We might want to touch base with them. Here's some great presentations. Those are things that I think are really good to share, not only with your team, but with some of your virtual people. And the reason I say virtual people is I have no hands in the organization. I do have them, but they typically are on my team and they control what is in my group. They don't go out and into PCs or things around that. There's other folks in the desktop support, help desk that are responsible for them. Why shouldn't I share that information with them? I do the same with some of our tooling. Is like, hey, you'll find this really valuable, so you should get access to this at this level, just because it'll make your job easier, and you're going to be my first line of defense. Because when something's bad, I'm going to ask you to go collect that PC and everything else. I need some people that are the hands and feet in the organization. So I should, for a real bad term, train them, but you don't want to go and like, here's how you do it. We already got that documented. We already have that. Hey, look for this, look for these other things, make them either. I think that is a really critical area to say, hey, focus in on sharing what you've learned, not only with your group and organization, but across the enterprise as well as the public side of it. Because at the end, I think all our jobs are trying to make the internet a safer place, because right now it is a dumpster fire for as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of good things that go on it. There's a huge amount of bad things that go on it. And if everybody becomes safer, everyone kind of floats up a little higher on that side of it that's there.
That's a great example, Richard. So let me ask you this. In the time that you've been in cyber, what is one problem you think we've really resolved in terms of a challenge that existed, if any? Based on your little chuckle there, you're like, we've resolved none. But I think we've gotten better in some aspects of security. Where would you say we've really gotten better, like leaps and bounds?
Yeah, I'll explain my chuckle in a minute. That's there. And I think the chuckle is that it's the same thing as like, we put a goal line and then that goal line moves again. And it moves about every 60, 90 days. So it's really hard. I'm like, I'm on the 1 yard line. Oh, no. Now it's 50 yards away. We went to the cloud and now it's 50 yards away. And you're like, oh, just to finish that. And I think that's one of the misnomers is people like, why hasn't things changed? And I think it's there's a lot of different things that are around that. Part of it is this word adoption. You've got all the analysts, the hype cycles, curves, everything else that's like, here's the early adopters, here's the later adopters, where most people are going to do it. Hey, that's kind of one of those things, but it's not a real high curve. It's a real drawn out curve in a lot of cases nowadays. There's different levels that people do. And I think that's a portion of, hey, you don't have infinite amount of time and infinite resources and infinite budget to go spend on everything. So you have to pick and choose what your capabilities are and do. And I think you're leaning into your strengths, or you're leaning into the weaknesses on that to change something that's there. But it's back to part of that is a cultural aspect. Security is important to everyone. And I think it's part of the other thing of the technical understanding of users, operators, administrators, executives around cyber and everything else. To me, we're in the golden age of cyber, because people are like, what do you call this? The golden age. It looks like a 2020 dumpster fire that's on that somebody poured gasoline back on that's there. And I'm like, no, this is really the golden age of cyber, because I don't have to spend 50% of my time trying to convince executives that a problem exists and we need to be aware of. They are aware of every single problem that's there, and they want all of them actually addressed. There's a different discussion that goes, need more resources, need more money. Totally separate conversation, but that's an easy part. The hard part was convincing them that there was a problem that needed to come up. And I think that was one of the key things that came into that. But I think going back to your question of like, what have we solved and everything else? I think we solved some of the areas and components around some of the critical stuff. And people can laugh or anything else. I think we've made a lot of progress in the world of IAM, identity and access management. And people are like, we still use 8-character passwords. Don't get me wrong. Yes, we do. But I think it's one of the things that comes back in a lot of cases with that, yeah, but we've done it into environments where repositories, multi-factors, and can be included in it, other solutions. So if you want to do something much more advanced than an 8-character password, you can today. The fact that are you doing something is a different argument altogether. So I think it's one of the things to say, hey, we've come out with technological solutions that do it and are capable of doing it. And I think it's one of the things, there's also some kind of misnomers of like, hey, data, monetization of data and things around that nature. And I'm like, one of the key things around privacy and some of the other stuff, it's like, we have all the technology to secure data and make it secure. That's not a problem. The problem comes up when we try to use secure data. That's where things happen. So the technology is there. Now we're left with policy and people and some technology on top of that to put fences around it. Because if I just tell you no, and you can't do this, that doesn't prevent anybody from actually doing that, as we all know and well. So I need to put some guardrails and things around that to keep you on the road, not let you careen off the cliff and do that. But I think from that perspective, technology around, like I said, IAM, endpoint technology, it has gone leaps and bounds over capabilities that were there. Endpoint used to be, guess what? I need to grab the machine and do a full forensic dump, give it away to somebody for 2 weeks, and they come back with a report that's actually there on that, instead of using EDR tools or other types of window events, forwardings, and things around that. All those things have now progressed into those environments where I can actually respond and react to an attack on an endpoint, whereas before, if it didn't get caught by my AV, it was on its way doing bad things in that environment. So I see things that are around that. I see things that have kind of fallen by the wayside that were supposed to be the pinnacles, or hey, if you do this, this makes things better. And I think what it boiled down to, a lot of these technologies that kind of had, I don't want to say were that kind of marketing may have oversold, or the idea oversold them. So things like threat intelligence is a good example of that. Threat intelligence is great, tells you a huge amount of things for your data if you have threat analysts on your team. If you don't, it's noise in a lot of cases on stuff that's there. And it's wrong, or it's right, or it's sometimes wrong, sometimes right. And I think those are some of the areas that are there. But I think, like you said, that there are components that are there. I can tell you that after this year, working remote and remote work, people have got things resolved, interesting things, other directions around that of new technology be integrated really fast, which is never necessarily a good thing in some cases, but sometimes a required thing, are becoming in some of those areas. And I think that is one of the things that everybody shifted to and had to on that. We've seen it from mobile technologies as well, have been that progression on that side of it that's there. That's all part of that. One of the great examples of things like that's been released of like biometrics, whether it's visual facial recognition from like functions to fingerprint readers on laptops. We've placed those for years on these devices. How many of those were actually implemented in organizations? Part of that. And I think that's kind of the crux that we get into that question, where has anything been fixed? Wow, you could never do a fingerprint 5-10 years ago on this that actually worked on a regular basis. But those were things that jumped into those scenarios that I say, you know what, the tech has been there. It's the last mile of that tech, getting it implemented, getting all the bugs worked out of it, getting everything that's there. Those are the hard stepping stones and processes that we kind of start doing. And unfortunately, something else happens and it steals that time away to finish off some of those scenarios. So a lot of this stuff, we're just going to give this to admins, or we're just going to give it to the system administrator people that's there, or we're just going to give it to marketing and HR. And I think that's a great starting point, but you need to continue on in some of these other areas that are there.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such great points. I think the one thing I will say about biometrics in general is there's, I think, 7 or 8 different hindrances with the implementation of biometrics beyond the personal device into a corporate environment. Primarily, one is privacy, and the second one is responsibility of the biometrics. You know, I did a very fun episode of Tech Corner with Roger Grimes, and we talked about hacking MFA. And Roger, who's a brilliant guy, you know, one of the things, you know, I argued was, well, wouldn't biometrics be a sufficient MFA? And he goes, no. And highlighting all the times that facial ID or fingerprint or all of those have been stolen. And he goes, well, people think that, you know, encryption is the end all to be all. And it's not. It's, you know, encryption is just one small piece of a greater picture of doing things. And so with, you know, biometrics, I think there's inherent challenges of implementation in environments, because it adds on a layer of complexities. Like, it does good stuff, right? Like, if it only scanning Richard's face and Richard's the only guy that can get in, wonderful.
Yeah, until I leave and then give you my laptop, and then you're like, well, we need his data. Well, he's not here, so it never opens up. Or to the same thing of like people going, like, unlock your phone, thank you. On the other side of it that's there. Those are, like I said, those are always parts of the caveat. They're always workarounds for any security technology that's there. The second the creation of the technology, whoever developed it had already figured a way to work around it as part of the development side of it. It's just the nature of that scenario. But I think you bring up good points, is that you shouldn't be reliant upon certain portions of technology to be the silver bullet, the golden parachute, to whatever you wish to call it, to say this is going to solve all my problems that are actually there. Because in the real world, it's going to create a bunch and you don't realize it. It's like everything that this is going to spit out means work for somebody on that side of it. And people look at me every time, the companies are like, what do you mean? I'm like, you're going to give my people and employees work. How much work are you going to give us? Because that's an important thing, because no one's calculated that. No one said, hey, this is going to create 4,000 tickets every single month in our organization that's actually out there. So you need to understand a lot of those things ahead of some of these technologies, because it may be the greatest thing since technology, and it may be stopping a lot of things that happen. But things like biometrics and things like that are still in their infancy, even though they've been around for a really long time, of the same thing. I came from the world of VeriSign with PKI, which ever since 1999 was supposed to be the year of PKI. And I think they tried it for like 10 or 15 years to say, this is going to be the year of PKI. And it's the same thing of like, no, it's a really great technology, but it requires a lot of understanding and implementation that is complex, and that's the portion where things actually break. And I think that's the same thing biometrics falls into it. It's another tool in your tool belt that you can leverage and use. And I'm a firm believer. I'm not one of these people that says I need less tools. And I think I'm one of the few people that comes back that I need less tools. Because from me, my perspective, if I need less tools, that means it's not a tool problem. Because I look at my garage and I'm like, how many screwdrivers do I actually need? How many socket wrenches do I actually need? I need the deep socket wrench. I need the regular socket wrench. I need the universal joints. You end up with tons of these. Well, will one do the same thing, or will? I'm like, yes, it's all the same thing. But I think from a perspective of tools, you're really trying to say, I don't have a person, or I have to split a person in half or in quarters now to manage these tools. I think that's where people are like, I'm trying to scale down my stuff because I don't have a staff big enough to support additional pieces. That's a different discussion to actually have. And to be honest with yourself around that is like, it's not about tools, it's about people that are part of that. And I think it's one of the things, because if you've ever done work and discovered, like one of my best examples that I can do, if anybody's ever replaced a shower before, they know there is a specific socket that is only designed to go into the shower to basically do portions of replacement on that, of taking the cartridge out. And you need that specific socket wrench. And if you don't, you never will ever do it correctly. So yeah, you need a special tool in some cases to be able to do exactly what you're doing. And it may not be for people, it may be just for one person, could be for a few hundred, but you would hate to go with, I'm not going to do it because of that. And then those 100, they're the problem, they're the danger. They never go away. That's the problem with security. Ignoring a problem in security, you're opening yourself up that at some point, the internet is not becoming a safer place. You could make that argument if it was. Hey, look, attacks are going down, compromises are going down. There's not been a news article in 3 months of someone being breached or ransomwared up. Internet's becoming a safer place. Do I really have to do this now? In this case, it's like, no, it's getting worse and worse and worse. So the longer this doesn't get fixed, the more danger that I'm actually in.
That's such a great point. All right, we're almost out of time, so I want to get to my favorite part of the show, the CISO Insight Round, our flash round where we ask 6 very personal, very deep, very revealing questions about Richard, and you get to know what they are. So I have Richard, in my backyard here in Georgia, I have a graveyard I have a graveyard for buzzwords. Which buzzword would you bury in my graveyard?
I would bury AI and ML in your graveyard that's there. Those are my, if you're going to replace AI, I would replace it and say you should have rebranded it. It is not artificial. It's augmented intelligence, because that's really what it's doing. I still need a human insight to be able to drive what's there. Machine learning, I'm like, you're none of the code that's written is written in languages that are going to be able to modify themselves and do things around it. It's standard. If you want to understand good, go take a statistics class. Seriously. Take a statistics class and you will understand probabilities, all the different terms and conditions that are there. They're just math equations. That's a bunch of data, and it's giving me an answer that's popping out. It's not magic. It's not machine learning. It's like, hey, if I do this over a period of time, I get the same thing. And I'm like, you're picking out standard deviations, plus or minus 3. All these different things are parts of that. I'm like, that's not machine learning. Why is the machine actually learning anything with that? You're just doing basically quantitative analysis on data, and you're getting answers. That's what you're doing. It's not anything that's learning off of this that's there on that side of it. And I think those things have just been like beaten to death into things. And I think everybody's in the same boat of like, yeah, right, sure. You're to the false prophet at this point in time of like, hey, yeah, sure. If it says this, send it off to the recycle bin at this point in time.
Well, AI and ML has been buried. This is now, at this point, a massive grave with that buzzword.
I'm glad that I'm not the only one that is like on that side of it.
You're not. Plenty more there. What's one technology that you think will change cybersecurity?
That's a good question. That's there. I think it comes back to I don't know if there is one particular flavor of technology that's going to do it. I think the idea from the COVID world of focusing on endpoints, focusing in on these laptops that people have, the mobile devices that people are leveraging and are using. Pick the technology category that fits onto that, whether it's EDR, EPP, whatever you want to call it. there's now a focus on that. There's a focus on patching them. There's a focus on updating them. There's a focus on that. Because if you remember, these were standard images. Someone took I remember back in the day, a CD, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, Windows doesn't even fit on a CD anymore. So you end up with different areas. They burn an image in it and hand it to you, and it was like, you're on your own. You're left with that control of that. And now people have grasped that, hey, these are dangerous, from just having control, loss of it, people caring for it, to, hey, I need to see what's going on these machines, because otherwise I'm really blind. I have no visibility to what has actually occurred and what is actually seen in those environments. And I think that focus, that area is there, because that's where the war is. People say, oh, look, everybody's things coming in through phishing. Phishing doesn't get and compromise the email server. It compromises the endpoint because someone clicks on it or clicks on a link that's actually there. The endpoint is where the war in cyber is being waged.
Well, that's the trenches, right?
Exactly.
That's the trenches. The endpoints are the trenches, and people want to focus on the tank. And it's like the tank and the airplane doesn't really matter. The war is won in the trenches.
Exactly.
That's how it's been historically done. So my next question, last book you read?
Last book I read, good question on that. Was that I am reading the 50, and I don't know which, I think I'm book 2 now, from the Discworld on that side of it. It's a sci-fi one. There's 50 books. They're all related. I love the Avenue of Death, and one of the streaming channels released a thing based on the characters of that. So if you like the called The Watch, and it's the same thing of, hey, Death is this cool laid back guy that goes back around it, but really interesting, funny book, light read, loved it. The other one that is always my favorite, that I have to give a shout out to, and it's not the last one I read, is a book called The Victorian Internet. It is around the telegraph. It is a quick read. I highly recommend it for people that think all the security stuff occurred in the 1980s, because it goes back to guess what? The same security issues you had were addressed by the telegraph. The same stuff of like encryption, all these arguments and everything else were all at the same point. So it's not like, hey, this started in the same. So The Victorian Internet is a great book, and a quick, easy read for those people. And it's really enlightening on that side of it as well.
Last movie you saw?
Last movie I saw was actually The Fifth Element, on that side of it. I know it's an old one. I just had the guts, and I talked about this earlier. It's like, unfortunately, in the COVID world, my streaming profiles and everything else is everything that says new release. I'm like, seen that. The next service, seen that. It's one of the things that's like, okay, there's not a lot of content that's coming out on a regular basis, and the other side of it is movies I used to love to go to movies and was always in them, but haven't been able to for quite some time now.
Indeed. Awesome. And what's your favorite music?
I love new wave and 80s music. For those that know me, I grab all my family and we go to Lollapalooza here in Chicago every single year. Everybody flies in and we have a whole 4 days, which unfortunately for my liver and my ears and everything else used to always be right before Black Hat and DEF CON. So you start like Thursday and then you continue on till that Sunday, you're done and you're catching a plane. The next Sunday, you're like, I never want to come back to Vegas and never want to see alcohol ever again at this point in time. So I love 80s music, a big new wave group. And I love all sorts of music, but I always go to Lollapalooza every single year with my kids. And it's been a multiple family thing over over about the last 6 or 7 years that we've always gone.
So give me your cyber prediction for 2021.
It's going to get worse. That's my prediction. I'm sticking to it. No, I think the prediction is going to come. I think you're going to see more ransomware, more OT shutdowns of organizations, factories, plants, things. I think you'll see the first critical infrastructure attack, and it may not be in how do you want to say it? North America, in regions that are there, that will be cyber related and cause damage at that point in time. That's there, and it will be attributed to cyber. And some of these, it's like possible, maybe, we're not quite sure. Yeah, if you talk to the right people, it definitely occurred. If you talk to the wrong people, no, it didn't occur. I think it's going to be either too large, too public, that you're not going to be able to hide it, more or less along those lines. I think that's going to occur, unfortunately, this year. I think targets are moving. I think it's kind of the stratification. It used to be thought that, hey, the large organizations are getting stronger. The SMB is kind of the sweet spot. And the attackers basically showed us that no, the largest organizations are just as easy as the smallest organizations. Doesn't matter to who we are, who we have. And the larger organizations have bigger pocketbooks in some of those cases. So I think that's there. I think third parties is going to be kind of a nail in a coffin in a lot of cases. Who do you trust now? Because so many people have gone, I trust everybody. I trust 10,000 partners of us. How can you audit 10,000 folks and everything else? And I think you're going to find out really quickly that's going to be a very shortened down list of who you trust, who you let into your network, how they get into the network, and what controls are in place. Because there's going to be a lot of third-party compromises. And we already see a couple of them, but I think it's just going to be a huge, massive numbers of, hey, we got compromised by our third party on that, whether it was true or that's just I'm pointing the finger at. You're just going to have more and more of that. And I think from a legal perspective, you're going to have some, and you're starting to see some now, some court cases that were for some other well-publicized breaches prior to this now coming to fruition. COVID kind of delayed some of those, but I think you're going to see some judgments and some of the other things that are going to pop in to a lot of places around that are definitely going to impact a lot of areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I can agree with that. I think there's going to be a very interesting aspect of 2021 that's going to be devoted to how the insurance companies handle ransomware attacks. I think insurance companies are at their wits' end paying out these attacks, and so
and they're hitting everybody. And I think you're going to hit some interesting ransomware. We already saw hospitals hit with it. You're having court systems hit with it. So you just imagine that. Do I have to release somebody because I can't charge them because the court system computer is actually down? I can't actually get a hearing for them. Or do we shift to paper at this point? Can we shift to paper? Yeah, everything's based on paper. I'm assuming it's possible. But you see some of these areas that have been underutilized and planned and just assumed everything. Hey, if I put everything in a building, it's going to always stay in the building kind of scenarios. I think there is a lot of fallacies in the organizations that 2021 will be the year that things happen to change people's minds on a lot of what you assumed was protection. I live in the wireless world, so there is no physical security anymore for any kind of transmission. So yeah, it's always hackable, period. No matter what you do, it's a math equation based upon energy on that side of it. So yeah, you're always you can always win that battle in most cases. So you're running in the same thing of, guess what? You're always going to be insecure, and you really have to start with that methodology. Because if you start with the idea that some parts of you are secure, you're making assumptions that you're taking money that you're never going to be able to cash in some of those cases.
Love it. Brilliant. Well, folks, that's it for this week's CISO Talk. We're going to be back with more next week, every Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. A new episode will be dropping. You can catch it on YouTube or on your favorite podcast listening platform. Richard, thanks so much for coming on the show. Folks, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Let your friends and colleagues know about the show, especially if you enjoy it, and make sure to support our great and loyal sponsors. Without them, this show wouldn't be possible. Until next week, folks, stay healthy, practice social distancing. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. It's 2021. Things always start rocky. They get a little bit better. Remember, last year started magnificent, and then just stuff went to hell right away. So let it start rocky. Maybe the curve will fix itself at some point. Until then, folks, thanks so much for tuning in, and stay cyber safe.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.